Hi, Algebra. We are back today and we are going to be learning a second shortcut method for factoring quadratics. Yesterday we talked about divide and slide, which used our x forms. Today we're going to be using a method that uses a table and greatest common factors. However, you'll notice on my board, I still have an x. We will still be using an x form in this process. So I encourage you to have at least opened and looked at the note handout that accompanies today's lesson. And if you didn't print it out, that's fine. Just be sure to take notes again on this shortcut method, because everything that you do today, I want you to use this method for. After today, after you practice problems and you get comfortable with this method, then you get to choose whether you prefer the divide and slide from yesterday or today's method. Now, if you look at this board, you'll say, well, that problem looks a little familiar. It's because I'm going to do the same 3 practice problems, but demonstrate our second method with them. So this still corresponds with 8.6 in your book. It's still on page 506, and we will be doing 2 different practice problems though once you are working independently with this method. So our first quadratic for today, 3x squared plus 4x minus 15. Step 1, we still need to use an x form. And as we learned yesterday, what goes in our ceiling is A times C. So this is going to look very familiar to what we did yesterday. My B term still goes in my basement. And then I'm going to solve it as usual. Find 2 numbers that multiply together to get me negative 45, but add together to get me 4. And as we did yesterday, we know that is 9 and 5, but where the 5 is negative. 9 times negative 5 gives me negative 45. 9 plus negative 5 gets me 4. Okay, that's step 1. You still need those numbers. Now, look at this chart. It's a 2 by 2 table. And we are going to be, if you remember, we were working with a table as one of our methods to multiply binomials. Well, today we're actually going to work a little bit backwards. We're going to fill in the insides and pull out greatest common factors to the outside. So I'm going to be specific here for our first time through, and we are going to fill in this table. Okay, our 2 terms that we got in our sides, they are going to go, and let me get a different color so I can show you. One's going to go here, and one's going to go there. But they're just not going to go in as the numbers. These, if you remember just from thinking backward to the FOIL method, they add up to get me 4x. So really, even though we're doing the pattern with the numbers, we have to remember that those are our outside and inside terms. Those are 9x and negative 5x. So step 1, I take the sides of my x form and I plug them in here in my table. Then what I do next, I take everything in my first term, not just the A, but everything with it, and I put that here. And I'm doing a lot of arrows. I know that's kind of weird, but I want you to be able to be taking these notes for yourself. And so you can see, you can follow the words in my note handout. I have arrows drawn there too, but this is going to help you so you can replicate this process. The last thing I need to know is my C goes in the bottom. Okay, so I filled this in. I'm going to review what step 2 was. Everything with my A, my variables included, goes into my top corner. My C with its sign goes in my bottom corner, bottom right corner. My 2 sides of my X form go here and they have a variable attached with it. Okay. Now, I'm going to erase my arrows though so I can still do notes outside of my table. So now that we have the placement right, this shortcut method uses my understanding of greatest common factor. And we did that at the beginning of this chapter. And I'm going to look at 4 different combinations of numbers and take the greatest common factor out of those. So let's get another new color here. And so if I'm in this spot here, I want to take the greatest common factor of these 2 numbers. So I'm going to do a little arrow here. So you can see those 2 right across the top in step 3. I take the greatest common factor of them. I look at my numbers and I take the greatest common factor. I look at my variables and I take the lowest power. That means that's the greatest number that can divide into both of them. Happens to be my lowest power. So between 3 and negative 5, my greatest common factor is 1. You don't need to write 1. Of x squared and x, I can take 1x. So x, or 1x, is my greatest common factor working across my top row. Let's do the same thing with across my bottom row. Between 9x and negative 15, I notice that this one doesn't have an x in it at all, so there will be no x in my greatest common factor. Now I'm just looking at the numbers, 9 and negative 15. Well, the greatest number that goes into both of those is 3. So now I want to look vertically at my columns. And this spot here is going to be taking out the greatest common factor of 3x squared and 9x. Well, the greatest common factor of 3 and 9 is 3. And then in this case, both of these have an x in them. And the lowest power is this x to the first power. So the greatest common factor of those 2 terms is 3x. The last one I have to do is still thinking vertically of this column. Between these 2 numbers, negative 5 and negative 15, the greatest number that I can take out is a negative 5. This one does not have an x. I want to stop right here and explain that nuance of why I chose to take a negative 5 out of these 2, but not a negative number out of those 2. In this shortcut method, if both of the numbers are negative, in this case, I take a negative number out as my greatest common factor. If only one is negative, I only take the positive. So if they're both the same, take that negative power out, or negative coefficient out of that greatest common factor. Negative 5 and negative 15, so I'm going to take a negative 5 out. That's how it works for this method. Okay, so hold on a second. And you see those arrows that I helped show you where I'm taking my greatest common factor? I'm going to erase them at this moment just so that it's not confusing for our last step here. Because if you see, what I have on the sides and on the top of this table can be formed into binomials. And I take the signs with it. What did I get here? Well, that is x plus 3. We assume that's positive because there's no negative. X plus 3. And in the top, I get 3x minus 5. My factored form of this quadratic is x plus 3 times 3x minus 5. Just like we did yesterday, our final step 5 is to check by foiling. And I can do that mentally. 3x squared, 3x squared. Negative 5x plus 9x gives me 4x. Last, negative 15. So I ended up right where I started. That's the way I check. Now, you might be saying, well, hold on a second, because 9 and negative 5, what if I had negative 5 here and positive 9 here? So that I had negative 5x here and positive 9x here. Well, it would still work out because remember, multiplication is commutative. Depending on if you put those in opposite spots, you would have just gotten your binomials on a different side. It would still work out. So don't be worried about, oh no, I reversed this and I got them. It's still going to be fine. As long as you're putting them in the right spot in your table, your final answer is going to be correct. Okay, Like I said, we're doing the same 3 problems we did yesterday, just showing a different method. So let's move on to problem number 2. And I already have that written here. And my quadratic is 5x squared plus 11x plus 2. And again, I'm going to go a little bit faster for the second problem since we've already gone step by step through this method. It's different than divide and slide. It uses a different set of skills, but it still uses an x form. So step 1, I'm going to fill in my x form. Knowing that now that I have a lead coefficient other than 1, what goes in my ceiling is a times c. So I get 10. My b still goes in my basement. So I have 11. Then I fill in my x form the rest of the way using the pattern that I know. Well, this one's nice. I don't have to worry about any negative signs, and it's pretty obvious which factors I'm going to use. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. And again, I'm referring you back to your note handout if you wanted to look at that under documents, or the notes you just took over problem number 1. Step 2, I have very specific parts of this problem that go into very specific places. These 2 sides will go here. And remember that those are really dealing with my 2 numbers that add up to equal my middle term, so they have to have a variable with it. My entire first term goes here, and my c goes here. Again, that's written out for you in step 2 on your note handout, and you should have taken the notes from our first problem. At this point now, I'm going to pull out 4 GCFs, greatest common factors. 1 from this row, 1 from this row, and then 1 from this column and this column. So I can do that pretty quickly now. Between 5x squared and 1x, my greatest common factor is 1x. From this row, 10x and 2, I'm not going to be able to pull an x out because this one doesn't have an x, but the greatest number that I can pull out is a 2. Now I'm going to work vertically. I can take a 5x out of this column and a 1 out of that column. Remember that my greatest common factor isn't 0. I don't say they don't have a greatest common factor because all numbers have that common factor of 1. So I do need to have a 1 there. Then I take those 2 numbers and I translate them into binomials. Take their signs with them, and in this case, we have all positives. And there's my factored form of this quadratic. My last step is always to check with FOIL, and I would end up right back where I started. Okay, let's do one more together. I'm going to clear this and write it again for our third problem, and then you'll have the opportunity to practice this method with 2 practice problems. 2x squared minus 13x minus 7. Remember, I'm doing the same 3 problems from yesterday's lesson, just showing you a different method. Okay, here we go. Step 1, I still need an x form. And there it is. A times c goes in my ceiling, and my b still goes in my basement. I need to follow the pattern that I should be really good at by now and see that I have negative 14 and positive 1 there. The sides of my x form go here with an x and here with an x. And at this point you might be saying, Mrs. Agate, in her book, we use all different letters as our variables. M's, P's, Q's, C's, D's, S's, R's, all of them. Doesn't matter. Whatever variable was in my problem, I need to use one of them here. So whether it's an M, a Q, a B, that's going to go here. Okay, my entire first term goes here, and my C goes in the bottom right. And at this point, I'm going to pull out the greatest common factor. let me get that straight again for you guys. For this row, for this row, for this column, and for this column. And remembering the rule that I stated with our first problem, if both numbers are negative, I take out a negative greatest common factor. And you'll see that pop up here. So this first row, between 1 and 2, my greatest common factor is 1. And I have 1x that I can pull out. Remember, when it comes to my variables and exponents, my hint is to take the lowest power. And in this problem, that's where I was reminding you, I have a -7 that I can pull out of that row. I can't take an x out because this one doesn't have an x, so it's not a common, they don't have it in common. Now I'm going to move to thinking vertically through my columns, and I'm going to take out only a +2. Remember, I didn't take a -2 because both of these are not negative. I only take a negative when they're both negative. But I can also take out an x. So the greatest common factor is 2x there. And then between these two, they both don't have an x, and 1 and 7 are prime, so the greatest common factor we see there is 1. Remember, that doesn't mean my greatest common factor is 0. It is 1. I take those two numbers, or two sets of numbers, and translate them into binomials. And so my factored form of this quadratic is 2x plus 1 times x minus 7. Notice I said them in the other order, because remember, multiplication is commutative. Okay, at this point, I'm going to erase this and write down 2 practice problems, and they come from different parts in 8.6. So you do need to see what I'm going to write down here. And I want you to follow your steps that you've just taken notes on step by step and factor these 2 quadratics. And when we come back together, I will just be giving you the answers for these. Okay, 2 practice problems. The first one is 10x squared plus 31x minus 14, 3x squared plus 16x plus 5. Okay, actually just kidding. I'll show you the whole process for these, but I probably won't narrate it as I go. Okay, pause the video now. Attack these 2 on your own using the shortcut method described in this video, using a table with greatest common factors, and restart it when you're ready to go over the answers. Okay. Still need an x form here. A times c gives me -140, and 31 is in my basement. Whew. Now when it comes to some of these are going to be a little bit tricky to find my 2 factors that go together. I encourage you to use your calculator if you need help finding your factors. So I worked through some of these and I figured out somehow 35 and 4 are going to work. Well, if I have a negative number here, negative here, I know one's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. So my chart looks like this. And I'm sorry that the writing is a little bit small back when I thought I wasn't going to show you step by step. Okay, pulling out the greatest common factor of each of the 2 rows and the 2 columns, I get, let's see, between 10 and -4, I can take a -2x. 35 and -14, I can take a -7. Working vertically, let's say I can take a 5x out of there and a, oops, not a +2. I want to take a -2 out of that one, because remember, when both numbers are negative, I take a negative number out as my greatest common factor. So if I were to translate those, see, look what I did. Totally threw my game. I should have only taken a +2 out of that. Come on, Mrs. Zagat, get it together. So my answer here is, look what I did it here too. I feel like I need to rewind this and edit it. Nope, I'm gonna leave it just the way it is because it's real. I make mistakes all the time. This one should have only been positive 7. If they're not both negative, I take a positive. Whew, okay. Guess what though? If I would have written these out with the incorrect signs, would I still have gotten the problem wrong? Hopefully not, because as my last step is to FOIL, I would have figured out, oh wait, something's wrong with my signs, this isn't working out, and I would have gone back to figure that out. Let me say it again. When they're both, or if they're not both negative, I only take a positive greatest common factor. So this one should have only ever been positive 7, only been ever positive 2. This is the only one that's negative because both numbers are negative. Whew. Okay, let's quickly go over the third one. Writing my x form, a times c gives me 15 in my ceiling. My basement is 16. This one's nice and sweet too. 15 and 1 are my two sides of my x form. Let's see if I can do this without making any mistakes. World's smallest table for you. Okay, so this becomes 15x, 1x, 3x squared, and 5. I took all of the locations and all the parts. Now it's time to take the greatest common factor. Of my first row, I can take an x. Of my bottom row, I can take a 5. In my first column, I can take a 3x and a 1. So if I write these out as binomials, 3x plus 1 and x plus 5, which again, I would confirm that is the correct answer by FOILing mentally. Okay, so I want to explain your work today. I found a worksheet that goes over and explains this process again for you. So if you are looking in RenWeb, you will see a document under the document section. And on that document, it shows a whole other explanation of this. Maybe seeing it a different way, different pictures, different it will work for you. At the bottom of this page, there are 10 problems. So your suggested problems to practice are the odd problems, 1 through 9 odd. And I also included the answers for those on RenWeb. So you can see those right there and check that you're getting them correct. Once you're feeling comfortable and ready to move on, instead of Khan Academy, I want you to do 2 through 10 evens from the same worksheet. So that would be 5 problems. And you would just do the work on a piece of paper, send me a picture of it instead of Khan Academy. That assignment is clearly described again in our lesson plan section of RenWeb, and this will be due Tuesday, April 28th at 5 o'clock. Okay, so now you have 2 shortcut methods at your disposal. After today, you get to pick whatever one you want to use. I have known about divide and slide a lot longer, so that's probably the way that I would tend to go, but that doesn't mean that applies to you. So I'm giving you options. I'm giving you different tools in your tool belt here. Okay, that ends our lesson today. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you for our next video.